Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursaleen. Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. How's everyone doing this evening? Alhamdulillah. Good, good, good. All right. So what I wanted to start off with, because it is pertinent, I think it's on a lot of people's mind, and that is basically the situation in Gaza. Now you might be thinking, what does Gaza have to do with atheism? And I'm going to ask you to just be a little patient, because inshallah we're going to tie it together bi'idhnillah. You see, after October 7th, obviously one of the things that arose in the United States specifically is we saw a great uptick in the number of people who were coming to Islam. And it was very odd because first we didn't really give the link or the causal link. Okay, so why are we seeing that every Friday after Jummah, someone wants to enter into the masjid and take their shahada, right? Because prior to October 7th, you didn't see that sort of frequency. Maybe every month, right? Every 2 months, someone would walk in. But now, I know of my own local masjid and masjids across the US. And when you would interrogate them and ask them, what caused you to come here today? Like, why are you, why do you want to become Muslim? And the overwhelming response that we got had to do with Gaza. Because what they said is, when we look at the people of Gaza, when we see the loss that they've gone through, the fact that you could lose your children, you could lose life and limb, that you're living under extreme oppression, and that it's a full-blown genocide, and yet when we look at the people of Gaza, what we see is extreme resilience. These are people that will not let down. These are people that come back over and over and over again. If you know the etymology of the word resilience, it's divided into two sections, right? Re, to mean something to do over again, and the zillions part, it means to bounce. So resilience means to bounce back over and over and over again. And so what they said is, every time we see them with the severity of everything that's going on, they always come back. And they don't come back like, downtrodden, with like looking down, like what are we gonna do? But they came with their heads held up high, as if they could see victory. And so we wanted to know, we have problems in our life too. We have marital problems. We go through divorce. We get flat tires. Our kids are, not listening to us, right? We have drug problems, alcohol problems, and so on and so forth. And yet, when it comes to our problems, we completely crumble. So what is it about the people of Gaza that makes them unique? What makes them different than us? Their problems are more intense, and yet they seem stronger than us. And when we researched it, we found that the underlying factor was Islam. And we want that. So this uptick, what we saw was that it had to do not necessarily with some sort of rational argument that was presented to them. Because a lot of times when we talk about atheism, we're assuming that I'm going to now come now and I'm going to give you some sort of rational argument that's based in a type of logical proposition, some sort of syllogism that will prove the existence of God, and then when you present that to people, you will find they will enter Islam en masse. And that's not the reality of it. Because when you look at how people come to Islam, how people look at Islam and how they look at Muslims, they don't look at Muslims or look at Islam as some sort of, cold, cerebral, rational endeavor. They look at it in the sense that, what does Islam offer to people? What sort of existential questions are answered in Islam? Now, what do I mean by existential questions? Questions about your existence. Because a lot of times, if we're born Muslims, we don't really reflect upon those existential questions, because by and large, they may be answered, and yet we've been brought up on it, right? And when someone asks you those questions, you may robotically answer them, all right? If I asked you, what's the purpose of life? Who can tell me? What's the purpose of life?
Worship
Worshipping Allah. Very good. Okay? All right. Where did we come from? How do we get here? Like, these are not hard questions, by the way. I'm assuming I'm talking to university students. So I'm not asking for some sort of complicated answer. How did we get here? Allah created us. So I get extra 5 points if you answer that one, it seems like. All right. What happens when you die? You go to the day of judgment, right? You are judged based on your actions and so on and so forth, right? Not complicated questions. And the thing is, most of us, we become acclimated to the answers such that we don't think about the potency and the reality that it undergirds for us. All right? I'll give you an example. And this is something that if you read Hamza Zortz's book, The Divine Reality, he gives this example. And it's in the form of a thought experiment. Okay? So we like to do thought experiments where we get to mess with the audience and stuff. So, you have to be patient with that. If you get upset, it's okay. I'm flying out tomorrow. So anyway, so you can talk to the organizers. No, I'm kidding. All right. So you guys ready for this thought experiment? Okay, here we go. I want you to imagine now that as I'm talking, you black out. All right. Now you just pass out. And when you wake up, you find yourself not in a lecture hall, but you're on a plane. Okay? Now you're not in economy. You're sitting in first class. Okay? And the seats are very comfortable. Has anyone flown first class by any chance? One guy. Okay. It happened to me once.
I use points, not cash.
What's that? Oh, use points.
Frequent flyer.
Anna, come on. Yeah, it was the same thing. Of course. That's what I tell people too. No, and you know what's really weird? Is that for some reason, like when you're in first class, this is a separate side point. When you're in first class, for some reason, you get a little bit of an ego. Like if someone comes from economy to use your bathroom, you're like, hey, what's he doing here? Right? Like it's like, Anyway, separate point. You were in this classroom and all of us, this hall, and then you black out and now you're on a plane, first class. The seats are absolutely comfortable. Okay? And the temperature is perfect. Now, I don't know if you guys have temperature wars in your houses, but I'm coming from Texas, from Houston, and I have 5 children. And you see, one of the major battles in the household is where to set the thermostat. Because some of my kids like it cold, some of my kids like it warm, and it is like World War III, right? And so I have to set my foot down. But in this airplane, you're sitting in this first class seat and the temperature is just perfect. Very comfortable. So as you're sitting here, perfect temperature, you look outside the window and you see this, that beautiful orangish color you see at Maghrib time, right? It's very pleasing to the eyes. So you look outside and you see it and you're like, wow, it's so pleasing, it's so comfortable. And after a few minutes, you smell something. And what do you smell? You smell, what's your favorite food, man? Fish and chips. Really? I thought you were about to say like beef rendang or something. Like fish and chips, man? Allahu Mustaan. Okay, anyways, we'll go with fish and chips. So whatever your favorite food is, the person comes and they serve it to you. Okay? So for me, because I'm coming from Texas, I like brisket and I like steak. That's just how I roll. Okay? So they serve you the food. You put the first bite in your mouth and it is amazing. It's like the best fish and chips you've had, or the best steak you've had, or the best beef rendang you've had, whatever you like, okay? Now, you're enjoying this meal. The seats are absolutely comfortable. Temperature's perfect. Outside, it's absolutely beautiful. Here's a question. Would you be happy in this state? How many people say, yes, I would be happy? Remember, the food is perfect, temperature's perfect, everything's perfect. Who will be happy? All right, some people, yes, no, okay. So for the rest of you, you would not be happy? What?
It's a plane.
It's a plane. Okay. So what's the problem with it being a plane?
It doesn't last forever. Like at the end of the day, you're gonna
Okay.
get off the plane and be bored.
Okay, but before you get off the plane and before you get to any of that, you were sitting in this classroom and you blacked out and now you're on the plane. So wouldn't you have a few questions? Like, I don't know, how did I get here? Right? Where is the plane going? Right? Who's the pilot? Wouldn't you have those questions? And so you may be happy, but would you have meaningful happiness? Probably not. If you consider and you think about your life like a metaphoric plane, that you come to a certain state of consciousness, that you're on this plane, if you haven't answered those questions, you are very uncomfortable. If you haven't answered, okay, how did I get here? That's very uncomfortable. For Muslims, generally, if you've been born in a Muslim household, you already know the answer, so you don't have that discomfort. You know how you got here. But if you've never been exposed to Islam or you don't know anything about it, you don't have that answer. What are you doing on the plane? Is that question about why are you here? Why do you exist? Again, those are existential questions that in a Muslim framework, generally we're brought up with. We're here to worship Allah, right? And then where's the plane going? You know where you're going. You're going to die. You're going to be resurrected. You're going to be standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and accountable for your deeds. So all of those questions for you are answered. But if you take Islam out of the picture, you're in a state of severe discomfort, existential discomfort. Maybe you're enjoying the beef rangdang at the moment. Maybe the seats are really comfortable and you're really into it and you love what's going on outside. The scenery is absolutely beautiful and you're enjoying all of that. But that's what it is. It's very superficial. It's like the nature of the dunya, right? It's very temporary. And the real underlying questions, in fact, are the true aspect of giving something happiness and meaning, right? When we ask the question, all right, like, why are you on the plane? Why do you exist? What's the meaning of your life? What's the purpose of life? We said it earlier. What is it? To worship God, right? To worship Allah. Okay. So, what does that mean? What do you mean to worship God? Like if I went to a Christian, I said, hey man, the purpose of life is to worship God. You think that they would disagree with me? Probably not. What do you think that they think of when I say worship God? What's coming to their mind? Probably prayer, probably going to church on Sunday. Or if you went to an atheist and you said purpose of life is to worship God. Because many of them come from, let's say, an Islamic backdrop or a Christian backdrop, they're thinking about going to Jummah or going to Sunday church or whatever it might be. Is that the purpose of life? Is that really what it is? Like, what does worship mean? What is the Arabic word for worship? What do we translate into worship? Ibadah. Okay. What does ibadah mean? How many people said submission? People said that, right? I heard a few just murmurs. Submission. Okay. Let me kind of expound upon this, because a lot of times we limit certain elements within the Islamic framework, the Islamic paradigm, and what happens is that isn't really, let's say, accurate or honest to the tradition. When we say ibadah, it's true, there's an element of submission. But as one of the scholars said, that it is ghayatul muhabba, it is the highest state of muhabba, the highest state of love and submission. And you need both. Because if you just have love, that is not ibadah. Like a father can love his children. But that's not ibadah, because he's not obeying his children. I mean, I hope so. We live in strange times, so maybe, I don't know, okay? Similarly, if you have just submission and obedience but no love, that is also not ibadah. If you have a tyrannical king whose subjects will obey him but they hate him, that is also not ibadah. For ibadah, you need both love and submission. So when it comes to what is the purpose of your life, it is to not just submit to God, submit to Allah, it is also to love Allah. And this is really important for many people, that when they approach Islam and they look at Islam as a worldview that is rooted in rules. Do this, do that, halal, haram. When they see it in such a way, they look at it as something that's just rule-based. And they say, well, that's too hard for me. Because what's the purpose of rules if you don't believe in consequences? if you have no motivation to follow them? Why would you then do it? If you take love out of the picture. And a lot of times what happens is our approach to Islam is very, let's say, overly based in rules. Everything is halal, haram. I'll give you an example of where this becomes problematic, okay? Is that a cat?
Yes. He wants to.
Wow, that is epic. Anyways, okay, so, sorry, that's really cool. All right, so I'll give you an example of how this manifests itself, okay? We have an issue in the West, and it's probably coming here too, I don't know. It's the LGBTQ issue, okay? Now, one of the problems that we have started to encounter is that you have many Muslims that because of the hyper-sexualized environment that they're in, they have started to feel attraction towards people of the same gender, all right? So when that happens, because of the environment they live in, they now may go to the imam of the masjid and they'll say, I think I'm gay, okay? Now, the imam of the masjid will say, let me tell you, homosexuality is haram, all right? Now, this may seem like a very clear-cut answer. Obviously, it's haram. What is not interrogated is the assumptions the person is coming with. Meaning, what do you mean I'm gay? Because when a person says I'm gay or I identify as being gay, what they're doing is they're making certain assumptions about identity. All right? And the Sharia, when you look at classical books of fiqh, they do not map well when it comes to people taking on an identity or a sexual identity. What do I mean? There are three things that if you look at, let's say, the history of the West, and then by extension, what we're going through now in modernity. And that is, perhaps around the time of the sexual revolution in the 1960s, there was concerted effort to take three elements, okay, and bind them together. What are these three things? Identity, actions, and desire. Okay? Before, let's say, the 1960s, the sexual revolution, these three things are separate. Your identity was not mixed with your actions and your desire. But over a protracted effort to do so, now these three things have been combined. So, if someone says homosexuality is haram, they don't mean it as an identity, because prior to the Enlightenment, no one would walk around saying I'm gay or saying I'm straight. It was not a thing. If you were sitting in, let's say, Germany in, let's say, in the 1800s, early 1800s, and you went to someone and you said, I'm straight. They're like, good for you. I don't know what that means. I'm gay. You're gay? I'm happy too. Maybe that's what they'll say. Because the concept of taking on a desire as an identity arises during the Enlightenment, and it is this concept that now moves into the modern world. So when someone says, I'm gay, they have taken on their desire as an identity. In fact, they may not even have engaged in the act. Just because they feel the desire, they say, therefore I am gay. But this is a mistake. We don't do that with any other desire. It's not like if I love hamburgers and I desire hamburgers, I become a hamburger as an identity. It's not a thing. And so when that young person who says, or maybe having desires for the same gender, he goes to the imam and he says, Ya imam, ya sheikh, I think I'm gay. And the sheikh says, homosexuality, gay, haram. You know what that person's hearing? You are haram. Your existence is haram. The identity that you are haram. When someone hears that, they're going to say, Allah thinks I am haram. Allah has not given me value. If that is the case, khalas, I don't need Allah. Do you see what I'm saying? So when we now make Islam overly emphasizing rules without understanding where we are and without understanding, okay, this has to take a nuanced approach, this can be very problematic, right? So the one thing that when we speak to people that have same-sex attraction, what we call SSA, like we don't use the term homosexual. We don't, when people say, I think I'm homosexual, you're not. You're just going through SSA, right? That's the first thing. And I want you to now reorient yourself. I want you to now think about why you have taken on your sexual desire as your identity, right? Because you are so much more than that. You are not who you want to have sex with. You are a slave of Allah. And then when you start telling them about who Allah is, why Allah is worthy of worship, not just submission, why He's worthy of love, that reorientates them. Do you understand what I'm saying, right? Because now you brought into the discussion, what is worship? Yes, it's submission, but it's also love. And so, is Allah worthy of worship? What's the answer? Yes, right? Why is He worthy of worship? Let's see, we're at an Islamic university. Let's see how they do. Why is Allah worthy of worship? Or have we just been hammered since we're young? He's worthy of worship. You never really thought about why.
Blessings, because I believe He gives us blessings.
Very good.
Ni'mah to be thankful.
Ni'mah to be excellent. Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. It's because of, the fact that He gives us blessing. My son, one of the aspects of children in the US, so when they're brought up, because of the environment, they're very entitled. Right? So I wanted to, kind of give my son a little bit. Agree? Okay. So I wanted to tell my son, I asked him one day, I said, look, his name's Abdullah. I said, Abdullah, let me ask you something. How many jobs did you work to earn one heartbeat? How many jobs? How much did you work? How much did you toil? To earn one breath? Wasn't everything that you have a gift from Allah? A blessing from Allah? And that you didn't do anything for it. It was a pure gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we never think about these things, right? And if you really try to count the blessings, you won't be able to do it. In tu'addu ni'matallah la tuhsuha. If you tried to count the blessings, enumerate the blessings, you won't be able to do it. Okay, let me ask you this. How many people recall the blessings of your molar teeth in the last week? I'll answer that for you. Nobody, unless you went to the dentist. Right? And yet you use your molar teeth every single day, every time you eat food, every time you masticate food, you're using those molar teeth. And that's one blessing. So that's absolutely right. It's because of the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. Okay. Is Allah worthy of worship if He gave you nothing?
Yes.
Yes. Why? After hardship, there'll be ease? Okay, but let's say He gives you nothing, like you have zero. There's no concept of hardship, but you have nothing. You don't exist. Is He still worthy of worship? Yes? Why? Yes? You should what?
You shouldn't expect any rewards from Him.
Okay, you shouldn't. So why is He worthy of worship then?
Because of the consequences.
Consequences. Okay, you don't exist. Is He still worthy of worship? Okay, so what is the concept of consequences? Okay, when we talk about worship, all right, and we said it's kind of two pillars in a sense. We said love and submission. One of the reasons we love Allah is because of the blessings He gives us. That is right. But the other reason we love Allah or we worship Allah or that He's worthy of worship is not because of the blessings, it's because of who He is. Who He is. Like, for instance, I don't know what sport do you guys play here? What's famous here? What's popular sport? Football? Soccer, right? That's what you... I couldn't help myself. All right. Who's your favorite football player? Someone help me out here. Who's your favorite? Shafiq, who's your favorite football player? I don't watch football. Oh, you don't watch football. The one guy chose... Okay. Who's your favorite football player? The guy in the plaid shirt. Right there, the glasses. Yeah, you. Your shirt's plaid. Who? Messi. Okay. So imagine now you're watching Messi play a football match, right? Football game. And all of a sudden he makes this amazing kick from I don't watch football though, you're gonna tell because I don't know the terms. But anyways, he makes this kick and it goes right into the goal, all right? Now when you see that, what's your reaction? Are you sitting there with total equanimity? Mm-hmm. No, you're probably like, yes, epic, that was awesome. What an amazing kick. All right, did Messi stop the game, run up to the stands and give you $100?
No.
He gave you nothing. Why did you praise him? For a quality that he has. If that's true for Messi, how much more is it true for the creator of the heavens and the earth? Right? So we worship Allah not only because of the blessings, but also because of who Allah is. When we know who Allah is, then our worship becomes more real and meaningful. And therefore you have to know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Because here's the thing, we're going to come back to atheism. Someone was asking, what are some of the causes of, why do people become atheists? You know one of the main reasons why people become atheists? Like, you know, we deal with this, we have a service called Lighthouse Mentoring, and people can log on and do a free 1-hour mentoring session, and the primary target is ex-Muslims, non-Muslims, and Muslims having doubts, anywhere in the world. So we have lots of data, 3 years of data that we've collected. So data-driven wise, when we look at the data, what's the main reason? One of the things that underlies or undergirds someone to decide to leave Islam or become an atheist actually has to do with the problem of evil and suffering more than anything else. Okay? And for the Muslims, let's say the Muslims that leave Islam or that start to doubt Islam, one of the reasons is that they do not understand, and I don't mean an abstract, way of understanding, but I mean something that's more real, understand worship and who Allah is. What we just went through. Because if your understanding of worship is submission, and that Allah is worthy of worship because He gives me stuff, right? The blessings. What happens when you perceive that Allah is not giving you stuff? Like you perceive that there's no more blessings. What happens to your worship? It becomes very problematic, right? Allah stopped. Why would Allah do that to me? Right? Allah was giving me all this stuff and now He's not giving me all this stuff. What is this? Because the concept of worship has now been, quarantined to a space that says, if Allah gives me stuff, I will worship Him. When He doesn't give me stuff, then I don't need to worry about it. Right? It's a very utilitarian way of looking at your relationship with the divine. And one of the main reasons is because we don't understand the concept of love and loving the divine. We have not studied who Allah is. Sometimes we'll have these debates. By the way, is someone holding me on time? Shafiq, somebody? All right, just let me know when I'm on my way out. Sometimes we'll have these debates with Christians. And the brothers were asking me earlier, like, do you do debates? And I'm like, no, that's the Brits. They do debates, right? They're the ones that are really exciting and you're finished and all of that's the British, right? The Americans are a lot more, we're a lot more couth. We're a lot more civilized. Anyways, so we do dialogues, right? We don't want to make it abrasive. It would be nice. And so even our topics, we do topics that are, a little more comfortable for people, or so they think. So one of the topics that we engage with when it comes to Christians is, why does God allow suffering? Or the issue of suffering, right? And I remember we had this one debate or one dialogue, and when we looked at the topic of this idea of suffering, one of my interlocutors, he said, "What are you going to highlight? What are you going to talk about?" So I said, "I'm going to talk about the wisdom of Allah." Okay. And he says, "Oh, I like that." Right? I said, "Okay." Because in their framing of who Allah is, they have boiled down Allah to only 3 attributes, 3 what we call three attributes, right? And they do this because of something called perfect being theology, right? Now, you don't have to get into it, but just take my word for it. It's 3 attributes. What are those 3 attributes? That God is good and loving, that God is all-knowing, and that God is all-capable. All right, these are the only 3. Because of perfect being theology, you can Google it later, all right? Now, do we only believe that Allah has 3 attributes? No. And so one of the first things that I came out the gate with was, no, we don't believe that Allah has only 3 attributes. We believe that He has many attributes, right? In 99 names and more actually, right? And so one of His names is that He's Al-Hakim. He's the one that has wisdom. He's wise. And therefore, if we may be going through certain things, just because we don't know why we're going through something, doesn't mean that there's no wisdom. Because Allah has the picture, and we only have a pixel. Right? That's quoted from Hamza. Right? And so he really liked that. Now, one of the things that arose in our conversation, because they have a concept of salvation, and so we were talking about, do you enter? He came up with this idea of, do you enter paradise by the mercy of God or by your deeds? Right. So how do we enter paradise? By the mercy or by our deeds? Mercy. Okay. So your Christian interlocutor would say, if it's by the mercy of God, why do you do good deeds? And then maybe some Muslims would be like, okay, no, but there's deeds too, kind of, sort of. I don't know. Well, oh no, you got me, right? And the reality is that this particular, let's say, shubha, or whatever you want to call it, actually, if you knew one of the names of Allah, you could solve it like this. What is that name? It is the name Al-Shakur. Al-Shakur, all right? What does the name Al-Shakur mean? Does anyone know? How would you translate it? Nobody has their phones out? Nobody's like, let me look this up. Usually that's what's going on, right? People are like, let me look it up, all right? Usually it's translated as the appreciative. That's how it's translated. But I want to dig down a little bit, because knowing abstractly what a name is and then knowing kind of more deeply and more meaningfully what a name is, these are two different paradigms, okay? The name Shakur comes from the triliteral root shakara, right? And typically when you think of shukr, you think of gratitude. But this term, it's related to something like when you say dabbatun shakur. The animal was shakur. Now what does that mean? It means that the animal that when you feed it a little bit of food, it gets fattened up really quick, meaning it has a really slow metabolism. It's the exact opposite of what all the brothers want, right? Because everyone here wants to eat as much as they would love and still have a six-pack, right? So it's basically the exact opposite. Because some animals, you could feed them and feed them and feed them and they're still skinny. Now, if you're going to slaughter an animal, do you want a skinny animal or a fat animal? You want with a lot of meat or a little bit of meat? A lot of meat, right? And an animal, dabbatun shakur, is that animal that you give it just a little bit of food and it's got a lot of meat, okay? Just like that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees the deeds of His servants that are paltry, that are not good enough for Allah, right? And He takes those deeds and gives them way more value. That is Ash-Shakur. In other words, you're doing a salah. When was the last time you prayed 2 rak'ahs perfectly? I'll answer that, never. Okay? You don't need to, like it was yesterday. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. You know that. There was never a time when you started off takbiratul ihram, illa taslim, and it was perfect. Doesn't happen. Right? And yet, it's by Allah's mercy that Allah gives that salah more value. And we find that when we talk about, do you enter paradise by the mercy of Allah or do you enter by your deeds, we enter paradise by the mercy of Allah that's predicated upon deeds. Because if Allah took the deeds at their face value, you would never enter paradise. But it's by the mercy of Allah that He takes those paltry deeds because He is Ash-Shakur and He gives it way more value. For instance, the Prophet ﷺ said, the one who eats and is grateful is like the one who is fasting. Okay, which one's harder? Fasting, right? And yet Allah gives you the same reward for a deed that's easier. For instance, the Prophet ﷺ says, the one who prays Fajr in Jama'ah, the one who prays Fajr in congregation, it's like he prayed half the night. And the Prophet ﷺ says that the one who prays Isha in Jama'ah, in congregation, it's like you prayed half the night. So you go to the masjid, you pray in congregation, all right, Isha, then you get up in the morning and you pray Fajr in congregation. And in between, you're sleeping like a rock. And yet Allah has rewarded you as if you stayed up the entire night. That is Ash-Shakur. Right? And that's also kind of the oh, this is my warning? Okay, Jazakallah khair. So, and that is Ash-Shakur. That is the name Al-Shakur, which kind of solves the issue of, do you enter paradise by the mercy of Allah, or do you enter with your deeds? It is the mercy of Allah that's predicated upon doing good deeds. Okay, is that clear? Okay, so coming back to what I was mentioning earlier, and that is understanding worship. Once you understand worship, meaningful worship, not just an abstract idea, now you're more well equipped to deal with the vicissitudes of life. Now you understand in a more meaningful way why you're on the plane. As opposed to just knowing the answer, oh, it's worship, to worship Allah. There should be a deeper significance of that worship, of that ibadah. And that's tied intimately with how much you know Allah. And how you know Allah is related to how much you study about Allah. Because by the way, how do we know who Allah is? What's the process? This is not a trick question. The Quran, revelation. What we know about Allah is what Allah tells us. That is like, that's an aqeedah point, right? You cannot make up stuff and say Allah's this. It's like, no, whatever Allah tells us He is, right? And so therefore, the more you engage with the book of Allah, this helps you to know who Allah is. The more you know who Allah is, this helps you in dealing with falling into atheism. Because let me be very clear, the answer to atheism is not a rational argument. It is not the kalam cosmological argument. Someone that becomes atheist or someone that's doubting Islam is in essence most of the time not looking for a syllogism. You know, A, B, therefore C. That's not what they're looking for. Because in essence, what atheism is what we call selective skepticism. Because if you're going to be skeptical about Allah, then you have to choose your skepticism. Because if you're skeptical about the existence of God, why aren't you skeptical about the existence of yourself? Why aren't you skeptical about the existence of morals? Why aren't you skeptical about the existence of the real world? Why aren't you, and so on and so on and so forth. The reality is, and we teach this in our courses, when we think about rationality, people think rationality is two areas. You have things that are rational, things that are irrational, right? So if I have a rational statement, that is, okay, I am Fahad. Irrational statement, I'm a married bachelor. Can I be a married bachelor? Islamically, can I be a married bachelor? Yes. Oh my God, how? I would love to know, please tell me. You can't, right? Even if you can have 4 wives, you still cannot be a married bachelor, okay? Why? Because by definition, someone who's married is not a bachelor, and by definition, someone's a bachelor cannot be married. They're mutually exclusive, okay? What if I was stubborn and I said, no, I can be a married bachelor. I don't care what you say. So what do you mean? That's illogical. What if I said, I don't believe in logic? Prove to me logic is valid. What are you going to do with that? Because the point is, unless you have an idea that, you know, there's a logical principle called mutual exclusivity, then you cannot make logical arguments. It's predicated upon logical principles. Can you prove logical principles? No. You start with logical principles. So in fact, rationality is not just 2 categories, but 3 categories. You have that which is rational, that which is irrational, that which is outside of rationality, what we call the supra-rational. And in philosophy, these concepts are very well known, that which is supra-rational. They're called axioms, axiomatic truths, you know, first principles, basic beliefs, different terms. In other words, they are things that you know for sure, but you cannot prove. What we call default positions, right? A default position is that which something you know for sure, but you cannot prove because it would take a lot of cognitive effort to prove it. I'll give you an example, simple example. Is the past real? What do you think? Yes? Can you prove it? How? If someone comes and says, I'm not sure about the past, man. You know the past, it's not real. Well, first of all, and then tells you, prove to me the past is real. Who should be doing the proving? You or him? Him. Because he is bringing a claim that is not a default position. He's bringing a claim that is not cross-cultural. He's bringing a claim that takes a lot of cognitive effort to make sense of reality. Does that make sense? So there are certain things, default positions, like the existence of the world, the existence of yourself. In science, there are certain concepts that are part of the super-rational, which we call axioms or first principles. For instance, one of those principles is that nature is uniform, right? There are causal links. You observe hydrogen plus oxygen and you get what? H2O, but what is that? Water, right? And you do it again and you get? And you do it again and you get? And you do it again and you get? Okay, you see it a million times. All right. You have observed something, right? Is that actually knowledge, or is that something that you've just observed so many times that now you believe it? Think about it. It's a pattern. Are you 100% sure that the next time you mix hydrogen and oxygen, you don't get milk? You won't know until you do it. But you've established a pattern, a belief in a sense, because of a pattern that happens over and over and over. And so now you feel, okay, this, but what is that based upon? It's based upon the first principle of nature is uniform. Can you prove that? No. You can only do the experiment a gazillion times and then eventually believe it. So even science has first principles. So the super-rational is outside of rationality, and without the super-rational, rationality cannot work. It becomes nothing. Now imagine someone says that I'm only going to believe something if you prove it. You know, you talk about super-rational. I don't believe forget they're super-rational. I'm a rational person. You religious people are trying to, take a quick way out. Okay. Well, if that's the case, it's like someone who says, that I'm going to doubt everything. Why? I'm not going to believe something until you bring proof. Can you do that forever? So there's no theorem that is infinitely defendable. You can't say because this forever. Okay? If that's the case, you have to have a stopping point. Something you know for sure, but something you cannot prove. Okay? It's like someone who says, okay, rationality, I'm only going to use rationality. It's like someone who comes to you and says, I have the perfect solvent. You know what a solvent is, right? Anyone doing chemical engineering here? Anyway, so it is the College of Engineering, right? Someone says, I have a perfect solvent. It will dissolve anything. Say, that's great. What bottle will you keep it in? You could have the perfect solvent. You have something, but you have to have at least one thing that is absolute, that is not soluble, that is not solvable. Everything cannot be relative. You have to have at least one absolute. So therefore, you have super-rational, rational, and those things are irrational. In Islamic terms, right, because I don't want to just have this abstract discussion, the super-rational is what's known as the fitrah. The fitrah. Rationality is your aql, right? And they work in tandem. You cannot separate the two and say, okay, well, I can have this and this and no. And when you think about how Allah convinces people of, let's say, against atheism or against certain concepts, He doesn't use discursive reasoning in the Quran. I'm not saying there's not rational arguments in the Quran. Discursive reasoning, meaning propositional reasoning, syllogisms. You don't find A, B, therefore C, right? A deductive statement is something like, all presidents of the United States were men, premise A. Premise B, Joe Biden is a man, we hope. All right. Conclusion C. Therefore, Joe Biden is the president of the U.S. Whatever it might be. That's a deductive formation, right? That being the case, you don't find that in the Quran. What you find is that Allah uses ayat. And what are ayat? Signs. And when you think about ayat, is the primary target of an ayah your fitrah or your aql? Primary. It's the fitrah. It's to awaken that which is inside of you, right? Like the Prophet ﷺ says, "Kullu mawludin yulidu ala fitra." Every child is born upon the fitrah. Every human has the fitrah. Every human is born in a state of goodness. And this is why, by your fitrah, you recognize things like what is fair and what is unfair. You recognize things like beauty. If I go off and I see a sunset with my wife, and I'm like, honey, that is the most beautiful thing I've seen. And she tells me, That is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Prove to me rationally. It's not a rational concept. Because perception of beauty, I got it, yeah. Perception of beauty is part of your fitrah. Language is part of your fitrah, right? And so on. So ayat target your fitrah, which is at a state that's higher than your aql. Because without your fitrah, without the super rational, rationality becomes meaningless. Does that make sense? Okay, so let me go ahead and conclude because 15 minutes ago he gave me a note saying 10 minutes left. So I'll go ahead and conclude with this. One of the things that I will encourage you to do, and this is what really the kind of the take-home point, as you start, as you leave here and you start to think about some of the things we spoke about, consider that when you look at people that may be doubting Islam or atheism as a phenomenon, understand that it's not limited to rational arguments. Because when we look at the deen in its entirety is what someone takes in. With all of its warmth, its meaningfulness, its giving of purpose and meaning. Because one of the things that's lacking in the West, probably the most, is this idea of being lost in a world of meaninglessness. Because you're all people are now just in a rat race, in a circle that's complete. So you get a job, you go to work, you get married maybe, right? Or you have a partner or whatever you call it, then you break up, then you go down, and then you go, and it's just round and round and round. So it's a complete circle related to this dunya, but it's completely hollow. And that is the thing that people in the West are feeling, and they're looking at Islam, and they're looking at you as Muslims who represent Islam. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.